quite frankly, in my opinion, I have to watch the finale again. I will say, apart from maybe the keys back in season 3, this is probably my personal favorite season finale of Seinfeld, and quite possibly maybe the best finale for the entire series. There was a lot, especially because season 8 didn't really have a storyline arc. It was mostly just life after the events of this episode, without saying too much. But I think that because of the season arc, so many questions at stake. And of course also wondering, could this be the last season of Seinfeld? Which I don't know if, because my parents didn't start watching Seinfeld until the last 10 episodes came out. So I don't know if people knew at the time that this for sure was not going to be the last season of Seinfeld, or also I don't know if they knew that this was going to be Larry David's last season as executive producer. We'll talk about that briefly first. So Larry David, as it always seemed like, he didn't really want to do this, but yet Jerry kept talking him into it, and he was glad that he stuck around for as long as he did. But just finally, it was during like the halfway point of the season, he kept saying stuff like, yeah, I'm not going to come back and do this next year. But then Jerry would talk him out of it. This time it was like he was a lot more mentally drained and exhausted. So this time he knew for sure that this was going to be it. So then of course, Jerry knew he couldn't convince him this time. They announced it, and he said he's not going to be coming back. And of course, next season, when it wasn't, which we'll talk about also about how Jerry said this is like a good test for him to show that he can do the show all by himself with no Larry, which is also the reason why in the last 2 seasons they cut the the stand-up routine they would do at the beginning and the end, because Jerry wanted more time to focus on writing the show rather than writing his stand-up material. But we'll save the impact that it left on how people took Jerry as both writer and main character in a show that only he was doing all by himself, and he didn't have Larry David there to work with him. But I know Larry said he had an office in Castle Rock, and he was sitting there when they were filming the first episode without him. He's thinking, "Oh God, I made a mistake. What have I done?" And then, of course, he had his moments where, he would come back to do Steinbrenner's voice in season 8. Because, I'll have to read the trivia when I get there, but I wonder if the reason why they ended the storyline of George working with the Yankees, and we didn't see Steinbrenner's voice again until the finale in season 9. More because Larry David just said when he came back, he felt he was so out of place, and it felt weird for him going up to, come in, and basically had to give his name and see if he had permission to go through. He's like, "You see that show up there? I made that show, damn it! Don't you dare doubt me that." But there was times that he felt like he just didn't belong there anymore. So I wonder if that's why at the end of season 8, they wrote off the story of George working with the Yankees, which of course we'll talk about that when we get to that finale a little while down the road. Hopefully not too much longer, because I'm trying to wrap up this series and try to move on to other things. For sure, because this has been going on for I think a year now, or close to a year. I'm not sure, but it's definitely been a while, but with how busy life is and whatnot. But just wanted to touch on that briefly. Like I said, I'll talk about more about the impact Jerry had on the show, just working by himself as executive producer without Larry when we get to the opener of season 8 of The Foundation. But want to touch on that a bit. But the story though for the invitations relied on mostly, the main thing was, it was a month away from George's wedding. And, Jerry's the best man, Kramer is supposed to be an usher, Elaine has no part in the wedding, but she wants to be in the wedding party as well, because she thinks she's a close friend. Well, as far as things go, first off, Susan kicks Kramer out of being an usher because Kramer cannot remember her name. He always calls her Lily instead of Susan. He goes, "Well, you look like a lily." So then Susan does not want Kramer in the wedding. And throughout the series, it is shown that, Susan really does not mesh with with George's friends. George also does not want to go through with this marriage thing that, him and Jerry made that pact about at the beginning of the season, saying we're going to grow up and not be immature kids, or we're going to be men and actually do something with our lives. Which, of course, didn't go through with Jerry until this episode where he tried to hold his end of the pact. But also, of course, it was, constructed from the beginning. Back when we met Susan back in season 4, when George first brought her over after Jerry and George were pitching the pilot idea for the Jerry show and to NBC, and that's where, of course, George first met Susan. Which I still wonder to this day, what did Susan do for work this season? Because they never really established that job she had since she got fired from NBC back in season 4 because George kissed her during a meeting. And Rita, whatever the heck her last name was, told Dalrymple, and then Susan was fired. So I still don't know what on earth Susan did, as she made a lot more money than George still. We'll get to that in a second. But also, of course, it was doomed from the beginning for Kramer and Susan, because remember, Kramer, first time Susan met Kramer, he threw up on her. Of course, the funny thing, though, still was that originally when Heidi Sweeberg was brought in to play Susan, she thought she was going to be Kramer's girlfriend. Because remember, in the first scene she meets Kramer, she just goes, hello, like, hi, like implying, like, okay, there's something soon to come here. But of course, that didn't happen. End up being that he vomits on her, so that doesn't work out there. So there's that. Then, of course, George tries to get Susan to have Elaine in the wedding party as an usher. She says no. So that then shuts off Elaine from wanting to go to the wedding, which led to also a storyline that got cut from the final edit, which we'll talk about that at the end. Also, I'm actually saving the closing scene of the credits for the very end, because that is one of my personal favorite scenes. But I don't do the fun facts and everything. But anyways, and then Jerry and then Elaine basically tells, basically they're like, oh, George's probably not going to be around as much after he gets married. So Jerry's like, it'll be just me, Kramer, and Elaine. So then Elaine's like, oh no, she goes, I'm sick of being single. She goes, I'm going to do something with my life. So she's going to be taking off from New York. So then Jerry's imagining what life will be with just him and Kramer both growing old in their apartments. And then as he's daydreaming this, he almost gets hit by a car. This woman, whose name was Jeannie, I remember she was played by Jeanine Garofalo, but what was her character's name again? Crap, I can't. Jeannie Stein. Come on, find a name. Jeannie Steinman. That's who it was. Jeannie Steinman played her. Saves Jerry's life, and then they start talking, and they realize, first off, hey, we got the same initials, JS, and then the stuff that Jeannie Steinman was saying is exactly what Jerry would say. And then they hung out a little bit more, and they realized they're basically the same exact people. And Jerry was just like so starstruck by her. And he tells Kramer, Kramer had another really random side story here, where he was saying how I guess his bank said they'll give them $100 if you go in and they'll greet you with a hello. Well, he went in and I guess the bank person said, hey, so I guess Kramer argued the manager saying he should give me $100 because he didn't say hello. After debating over the rest of the bank people, they decided to give him $50 and split it in half, even though a hey is also the same thing as a hello. Anyways, Jerry, though, then after Kramer tells a story about that, Jerry says, I think I've realized something. He goes, I'm in love. I've been waiting for myself this whole entire time. This woman's incredible, saying all this. And then basically Kramer then eventually meets Jeannie, and he says he doesn't like her. He's like, it's too much. She's too much like you. It's freaking me out. Basically saying he has, Jerry can get his way more now over him. So now it looks like, Elaine, of course, was separating because also Elaine found out that Susan said no to, being in the wedding party and whatnot. Now, of course, George's probably going to be going to separate ways. Elaine says she's going her separate ways. She doesn't even want to attend the wedding because she would have to be sitting at the singles table. And now Kramer seems to be miffed at Jerry. So everything's just all divided. So, if you didn't think that, no, this for sure is going to be the season finale or not, then you really thought, well, oh boy, they're really setting up for them to go their separate ways. Maybe it is time for all these characters to move on. Jerry, though, of course, does have a repeat of what George had back in the engagement episode in the series season premiere. And he sees, he's on the beach, he sees these couples in love and whatnot. And then, what does he do? He takes off, finds Jeannie, proposes, they're engaged, they're getting married the first day of fall, September 21st. Day before my birthday. But then, of course, later in the episode, Jerry's like, I think I made a horrible mistake. He goes, I can't be with myself. It's driving me crazy. I hate myself. Even after, of course, Kramer apologized that he was happy for him with being engaged and whatnot, and this and that. And, of course, Jerry's thinking he's holding up his end of the pact. But anyways, the main story. The main story of the invitation that I've skipped over. So George, freaking out. He's trying to find some way of getting out of this. He does not want to go through with this. He says he thinks he's made a horrible mistake going through with this. Why he didn't just do the pick like he did in the pick episode when he tried to briefly get back there with Susan for like a minute. And then he said, I walked up the stairs to that apartment and I just made a terrible mistake, so I did the pick. So why didn't just do that? I do not know. But George, of course, has tried finding several ways to get out of this, and just all didn't work. So, of course, at the beginning of the episode, we're going to go back to the beginning now and just talk about the main story. It's the biggest one. They go shopping for their wedding invitations. And, of course, the lady says now they're arranged in this. She gave her this big, book that had all the invitations. They're arranged from most expensive to least expensive in the back. And he sets it down. George, looking serious, just goes, flaps the whole book to the very last page. And he picks out these very cheap looking invitations that Susan thinks look super ugly. And then George is like, what's the point? You're going to give them to them. They're just going to hand right back to you. You don't need to be big and fancy. But then the lady says, they haven't manufactured those in a long time. They may have a few boxes still in their warehouse. So, but she says, I guess, that the envelopes are tough to enclose. You have to really moisten them to, get them to seal. But, of course, George, being cheap, still wants them. But, of course, he's still trying to find some way to get out of this. He's saying he's going to, leave a note for Susan, move to China, but he can't go there because of his job. And then he said, how about, and Jerry says, well, how about, you just leave a note, but then move to another borough, move to like Staten Island, which George thinks is a great idea. Just go to Staten Island. But then he says, you got to, still get all your clothes. He goes, I'm not going back there after all that. So he's trying to find some way for Susan to break up with him. So Elaine says, one thing that turns her off, which you all know from back in the Keith Hernandez episode, is smoking. So George tries to smoke in front of Susan, which, of course, Susan's saying, I don't like this, you're going to have to quit. And then, of course, George tried to still keep going, but the cigarettes made him sick, and he knew he can't try that one again. So then Kramer pitches an idea, a prenup. And Elaine says if a guy ever said he wanted to sign a prenup, I'd break up with him. So everybody was like, yeah, mention the prenup. So George goes back to the apartment, tells Susan he wants her to sign a prenup. So at first Susan's upset about it and shocked that he mentioned it. But then she just starts laughing her head off. She goes, that's no problem. She goes, I make much more money than you anyway. Sure, hand me the papers. That idea is out of the bag. So George literally has nowhere else to go with this. He, though, unfortunately, didn't have to do the work. Well, people say he somewhat did, but it was unintentional because he didn't think that was going to happen, even though the envelopes were cheap. But here's what happened. George went out. As he's going out, they delivered the envelopes and the invitations. So Susan had nothing to do that night. She starts working on the invitations. So they cut back and forth with several things going on at the same time with, Jerry, thinking about proposing to Janine. They propose. They see the door of the bar. But during all these back and forth scenes, you see Susan licking the envelopes. The first one, she's like, ugh, this is yucky. The second one, it was like, ooh. And she starts looking like, not looking too well. Then the final one, you see her struggling to lick the envelope. And she just goes, and we're like, uh-oh. So then George shows up later to the apartment, tosses the keys, looks over and sees Susan laying on the couch, just nods at her. But he starts to walk back, realizes, wait a minute, and notices that she wasn't moving. So this is actually the scene wherever Jerry's telling Kramer that he thinks he's made a mistake, and he says, I hate myself, I can't go through with this and that. So then George calls and says that he's taking Susan to the hospital, and they're not sure what happened. So they're at the hospital, and then out comes the same doctor from back in the Junior Mint episode, who was good. He had an excellent doctor voice, which, for like a dramatic moment, I think it made the scene really funnier, good and funnier because of, George's reaction, well, everybody's reaction, and how, serious the doctor was. But the doctor says, are you the husband? He goes, no, the fiancé, soon to be husband. He goes, yeah, well, I'm sorry. She's gone. And then George, was serious, but like seemed a little excited. It's like, what's that? She expired. Huh. So she's dead. Yeah. Huh. Like, trying to, look serious and but not overexcited. The fact that he's got this weight off his shoulders, but for crying out loud, the woman's dead. And then he asked, has she been exposed to any type of inexpensive glue or something like that? He had said. And then George finds out basically with the doctor's explanation that Susan died by licking the envelopes, because apparently the glue on the envelopes for the wedding invitations, with how cheap the envelopes were, was very toxic, which is what poisoned Susan basically, and is what killed her. So of course, George shook the hands, said thank you to the doctor, but of course the doctor mentioned later in a certain episode that George took this news of Susan's death with sweet jubilation, or whatever the heck it was. So of course George goes over and tells them and says she's gone. Dead? Wow. I'm so sorry, George. And there's Kramer going, poor Lily. And then of course, and he's just like, yeah, I know. And he said, how did it happen? And then George mentioned that apparently the glue for the wedding invitation envelopes was toxic. Dumb luck, but terrible dumb luck there, of course. And then now it's just like, so you're not getting married? He's like, yes, I'm not getting married. Trying to get excited, but still, stay serious for the moment. But it was just priceless, cruel humor. And again, they said to the inside look, the whole idea of Susan dying was, again, because, they never really, killed someone before in the series. Well, they never, wrote someone off through death, is what I meant to say. But of course, even though they had a couple reoccurring characters that had died, like Manya back in the Pony remark, Gary, the friend who faked cancer, but then he died in a car accident from fixing his wig. Not many, but this is the first biggest character, Susan, that got written off. And again, the main reason why was because mainly Jason Alexander in an interview said it, but even the other characters stated that they just didn't have the comedic timing with Heidi Sweetbird. She was a little difficult to work with. So that's why, of course, they wrote her off. And of course, I guess, I can't remember if they're either watching the ending scene to the engagement, or I think it was also from the episode wherever Susan and Elaine were hanging out more, and then basically she, basically it's the episode where, Susan realized she couldn't really hang out with just Elaine and Jerry without George. And then that's the episode where Jerry Seinfeld and Julia Louis-Dreyfus first discovered that they couldn't really work with Heidi Sweetberg well either. And I guess Julia said something like, "Oh, don't you just want to kill her?" And then that was when Larry was like, So of course the question was again, how could someone die in a sitcom but it still remains funny? And just like a goofy, dumb luck George thing, the idea of I think it was Tom Gamble, I think who had heard that you could die from licking very cheap envelopes or something like that, because the glue is toxic on it or whatnot. So so that's what they went with, and of course George's reactions was priceless. Oh god, it was a very well done scene. Now, of course, that's not my favorite scene in this episode from the cruel humor. The cruelest came in the end credits scene, which I'll get to that in just a second. But a couple fun facts. The whole idea of Kramer suggesting the prenup was an inside joke because Jerry Seinfeld's girlfriend, Shoshana Lostein, called off their engagement after being asked to sign a prenup. And of course, this is one of the last episodes until the series finale that featured Jerry's stand routines, because Jerry took over for Larry as executive producer, and he wanted to spend more time focusing on the episode, running the show, rather than come up with stand-up material. Of course, they had the same when Jerry proposed to Jeannie, played by Janine Garofalo. They did basically the same reenactment as the scenes from whenever George proposed to Susan in the engagement. I also got to mention there was a blooper where, and it was actually from a deleted scene where Jerry and Jeannie were kissing, and then they're both saying something like, "Wow, that was one heck of a kiss." Basically saying they're both great kissers. And then, but Janine actually cut him off, and she goes, "You got a line." She goes, "Sorry, I'm kissing Jerry Seinfeld." And then she says, "It's good luck to kiss a Jew on Passover," like very softly. And Jerry's like, Janine thinks it's good luck to kiss a Jew on Passover, basically, or something like that. Which everybody got a good laugh out of it. Of course, like I said, the whole thing with writing off Susan was, again, I already explained that, which of course this is one of two times where the audience turned on George, because people thought that George killed Susan, and the second time was earlier in the episode where George ate the eclair from the garbage. This was also in 2005 ranked the number 8 episode as part of the top 100 most unexpected moments in TV history. But Heidi Sweetberg admitted that she loved the idea of how they wrote off Susan and thought it was a very well executed thing. The other big thing, of course, that actually didn't make the cut was this was also going to be the only episode in which we see the real George Steinbrenner. I guess Steinbrenner was in LA for business, and basically they asked him if he wanted to come and actually be on the show and actually play himself. The story was going to be that in the scene where Elaine goes to George's office to tell him that she's not going to the wedding, because Jerry just met Jeannie, and she was going to be sitting at the singles table all by herself with nobody to talk to. Steinbrenner came in and said how singles tables are for losers, and mentions how, the Yankees aren't losers, so he offers to accompany Elaine to the wedding. And there were scenes where they went out to dinner and they were talking, getting to know each other. Of course, there was supposed to be, in the last scene, a scene of over the shoulder of Julia Louis-Dreyfus, basically pulling what they've done with Steinbrenner, with having Larry David, do the voice, and then someone else going like this, to be as like a gag. And it was pretty funny when I saw it, but after a while, after they in the inside look, after they shot the scenes, they realized this is kind of a huge mistake. They kind of killed off the whole humor thing of doing Larry's voice and having Lee Baer come in to do the motions of, and they had the shots from behind. So that's why they cut the scenes, and it's now just deleted scenes, and they're going to go through with it. But the moment I've waited to talk about the most. My favorite scene in this episode. And thinking back now, for the longest time, I always thought the best, George moment with the true, George Costanza to a T was back in the Red Dot, where George was running through all these, reasons as to why, he had sex with a cleaning lady on the desk in his office. And when he realized that she snitched on him, he had nothing else to say. But you see just all of the possibilities of excuses running through his head, and he just goes, "Was that wrong? Should I not have done that?" And he says, "I didn't know it was wrong." Well, I think this one topped that off. So in the closing credits scene, George is on the phone. And the first thing he says is, "Can I speak to Marissa Tomei, please?" This, because remember back in the Cadillac, Elaine had that friend who met George, thought George was funny, and thought that he's exactly Marissa Tomei's type, and she's friends with Marissa Tomei. And George is obsessed over the fact that his type was good for a woman, a popular woman, a beautiful and attractive woman like Marissa Tomei, and he's obsessed over it, wondered, what if I wasn't engaged? Could I have had Marissa Tomei? But of course, he meets up with her for one date, and she's laughing at all of his jokes, including the horse manure stuff he tried to use on that waitress from Monks that one time, and thinking season 6 or whichever one it was. It's been too long. And it worked out until George mentioned he was engaged. And of course, if you didn't mention that Marissa Tomei was in them, she was really into them. So he calls Marissa Tomei. And George mentions how he's a short, stocky, bald guy she just went out with recently. Of course, we can't hear what Marissa's saying on the other line. But he said, I called to let you know that... Oh, also, I'm sorry. Before I get to that, this scene, time out for a second. In the end of this, the hospital scene, Jerry was repeating the same scene about that Jerry and George had back in the engagement episode whenever... Jerry decided not to go through with talking to Melanie again because she ate her peas one at a time, and he's like, "Well, I'm getting engaged. I thought we'd both be getting married." And then we had a pact, which was repeated. But anyways, back to Marissa Tomei. So George calls Marissa to tell him he's not engaged anymore, and he tells her that she died from the toxic glue from the wedding invitation envelopes. And then he mentioned this to the doctor also. He mentioned her, he says, "Yeah, we're expecting about 200 people." And then he says something like, "Well, the funeral's tomorrow, but I'm pretty free this weekend." And she just hung up the phone, and George was like, "Hello?" It did, the expression changed on his face that he's literally jumping the gun, thinking he can just walk back over and call Marissa Tomei, ask her out on a date, because he's back on the market, just for her to hang. He's like, "Oh, hello?" But people think that scene before in the hospital was, the funniest, cruel humor scene. You gotta give a rub to that, because that was pretty darn funny. It was... I don't think Larry Charles is not a part of this. But this was something where, they were taking, as Larry Charles said, who was the king of dark humor. You take something and it's 10 degrees this way, it's sad and tragic. But if you turn it 10 degrees this way, it's funny and humorous. Well, I think they had to go beyond that 10 degrees to make this story funny. How do you write off a character through death, making it funny? And how do you have this cruel, rude humor, but it's hilarious too? That Marissa Tomei thing just cracks me up. That's just you can put the stamp on it there. That's gotta be one of the best George moments. Is when he calls Marissa Tomei right after his fiance dies from licking toxic envelopes. Dumb luck there. And as Jerry Seinfeld mentioned, this show should have been called Dumb Luck. Just for him to say after, mention he's not engaged anymore, she died. Well, the funeral's tomorrow, but I'm free after that. And she just hangs up on him. He's like, "Hello?" It was thinking he didn't do anything wrong, but... Oh, God, that was just so funny. Again, seriously, I think that is the best George moment in the whole series. It's gotta be. And yeah, half hour later, we talked a lot about this episode, but it was worth it. I think this is probably the longest review since the opening episode when we did like the how it began and talk about the very first episode. But yeah, there was a lot to talk about this episode. Like I said, I think definitely one of the best episodes of the series. And in my opinion, well, my favorite finale of the season finale probably would... Well, you gotta give the opposite some credit also. But I still say my favorite, because it had an actual cliffhanger going to the next season, was the keys. Whenever Kramer got upset with Jerry, because Jerry took away his spare apartment keys and he drove out to California to become an actor. But I would say this might be the best season finale in the series. Very great episode, and just... Gosh, that Marissa Tomei thing just cracked me up. But yeah, guys, that's my thoughts on the invitations. That's the end of season 7. We got 2 more seasons left in this Seinfeld review series. I'd like to try to get these done and my Harry Potter Let's Plays done by the end of the summer. That is my goal. And then after that, we'll see where we go from there. But guys, that's my thought on the invitations. Do you think this is the best season finale? Do you think this is the best way to write off Susan and to end season 7? And what are your thoughts also about Larry David leaving the show? And of course, what do you think about that Marissa Tomei bit at the end of the episode? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. And follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAir93. I will see you guys in season 8 of the Seinfeld review series. We got like 44 episodes left or whatnot, whatever the number is. We'll have to wait and see. I'll catch you guys later, guys. Have a great rest of your night. Peace out, everybody. We had a pact!